On to our work session. This is item E. This is the time reserved for topics of discussion, and under item E1 is the review and discussion of next steps for the Yamhelis Westsider Trail Bridge project, master planning and grants, and that's been continued for since April 1st. So at this time, Christian, do you want to bring us up to speed on what the input from ODOT has been? Oh, Ken?
I can do that. I had a meeting with representatives of ODOT yesterday afternoon, and they explained the questions that the board had as far as what they would be open to or their recommendations. Sorry, I'm distracted. As far as their recommendations on what a repayment options are available to the county, they are currently working on providing a written draft of the options available to us. And I anticipate their timeline that I would have that, that proposal by early next week. So I don't have anything to present today, but I will have something for discussion at next week's formal.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioners, any comments on that piece?
No, I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you for having that meeting.
Okay, thank you. I know we had discussed having an internal, sort of just an outside review of the progress and the bridge project, and it was determined that Public Works would not be comfortable making that assessment. So we've had some discussions, Ken, about bringing in external engineers, somebody to take a look at that project and give us an idea of what the actual completion date would be, and a little bit more about the financing piece of that, because I know we had some questions about what we were charged, what we were anticipating getting back in terms of buyback for equipment. And now that we hear Cynthia talking about the price of steel going up, I hope that Farline factors that in to what their recommendations are. But I'd also like to have a look at some of the objects that were perhaps the items removed from the site that we that would be part of a buyback thing, so that we can take an inventory of that. Ken, were you unmuting for a reason?
I was preparing to unmute. I was giving the board a chance to, I wasn't sure if you were ready for me to speak on that.
Yes, please.
I'd like to hear from Ken.
Thank you.
Okay. So I did meet with Greg and Mark, and part of those discussions were getting some thoughts about, because this is really specific to the bridge project, is getting someone, an engineering firm or an outside party to take a look at, be able to review the invoices and the scope of work, and then generate, you know, whatever questions we need to pose to Dowell or Farline, or that the board has, and to do that review. And I do have a contact with an outside engineering firm that has expressed that they do provide that. And right now they're just pending from me. And that's something I'm going to work on today, is essentially giving them a scope of work, so then they can send us an estimate on what it was going to take for one of their senior engineers to do that review.
Thank you. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I feel like if we're going to spend the money on something that is an external audit for the bridge, you all have seen the letters that have been submitted recently, yesterday and today, into the public comment requesting a comprehensive audit. And I think that was the spirit of why I introduced this, that it be more comprehensive about the whole project. So if we're going to spend money on one part, I don't want to double up and, you know, try and bring in another auditor for the entire project. So I feel like we should be erring on the side of a comprehensive audit. And also, Christian, is that something that we would have to put out for an RFP, or how does that work?
So it would depend on the price. and we could develop a budget, ask a couple of vendors what they might charge for that, and then determine whether or not we needed to get 3 quotes or if we needed to do a more full-blown RFP. I suspect it would be it would be the kind of solicitation that if we had to do anything, it would be 3 quotes. I can't imagine it would be more than $150,000, but we can confirm that. And it would probably be good for us to get multiple quotes from a number of different bidders anyway, just to make sure that we're getting a competitive pricing.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would be good for that. But I do, you know, it's not just the bridge that folks have a problem with, it's the entire project. So if we're going to do an audit, we ought to do it the right way and do a comprehensive audit on the whole thing, the whole scope of the project.
Now, when you say the whole thing or the whole scope of the project, are we talking about the bridge construction project, or are we talking about the larger Connect 6 grant and the design work that went into that? I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any dispute over the acquisition grant or how that sort of went about. It doesn't seem like there is, and it certainly, as far as I know, it wasn't litigated in any way. So where the trouble started is really with the Connect 6 grant. So I think that is probably, you know, when I say comprehensive, it's every part of that, you know, the invoicing, the scope of work, what happened along the way with Luba. So I want to make sure that we're not just looking at the bridge in terms of auditing where it's at and how much money it would cost to finish it. This really is a request, as you've seen, for a comprehensive audit of what happened with the Connect 6 grant.
I'd like to just see if we can get a price from our initial inquiry as far as an engineering assessment. And also if that assessment that we talked about with independent engineers would include not just what stage is the bridge at, but what about the materials? What about what we were charged, so that it would be a bigger scope than simply saying, well, it's going to take 10 days to finish it or 7 days to finish it, and you've got steel railings over here and the buyback would be $80,000. Looking for a little bit more than just that. As far as the cost of a full forensic audit, I'm in the place where I'm really sort of struggling between throwing good money after bad at this point. I do want the answers to those questions, but I've been asking for them for 7 years, and I haven't really felt that I've gotten the answers that would satisfy some of the questions that I've had, as far as, do we have a budget for this? What was the budget? How much is this going to cost? Where does this live? What department does this live in, and what have we spent so far? So it wasn't until I asked those questions, probably a couple of years into it, that we started to make an accounting of staff time, so that we can't even, you know, at this point, we can tell you what it's going to cost to paint the courthouse, because we got bids and we knew we had a dollar amount for a project. This was a project that was a blank check, no line item in the budget. It was pretty much all bets are off. We can spend what we want. And I believe, and this is where the spanking comes in, and I'm going to get this off my chest right now. The spanking comes in because when I asked, I was the only one of 7 commissioners to ask some pretty basic questions. What does this project cost? Have we done our due diligence? Are we in danger of any litigation? Can we please be careful, because this could happen. What has happened, we've had a number of remands from Luba. Now remember, Luba, Land Use Board of Appeals, is an apolitical, nonpartisan state agency, hardly what you would call the bastion of any one particular side of the aisle. So let's take the political component out of Luba. Luba has a number of times spanked the county for things that were done that were not done according to Oregon land use, and some things that we did. Our latest one was, now we've got a bill for $50,000 because the appellant, who questioned this building of a bridge on land that hadn't been approved for this particular project, they appealed, and now we have to pay their attorney's fees. This is perhaps the largest, if not one of the largest, rulings that awarding of attorney's fees ever, and we're on the hook for 50 grand. So now we're going to be asked, do you want to litigate this? At which point, if we lose that, we're going to have to pay their attorney's fees again. So I just want to make sure that the whole reason that we, or at least I, have wanted to put a halt to this is because this litigation is never going to end. And it's like we're sitting down at a craps table with using the House money to gamble. So we can just litigate and litigate and litigate because we're using taxpayer money. I said, this needs to stop. And this was the latest insult, is when Luba said, you guys blew it big time. And your presentation was not supported by probable cause. And they gave us a royal spanking. And they said, it's going to cost you 50 grand. So I'm going to stop there. And I needed to just say that this was I think, malfeasance on the part of past commissioners who never asked some questions as to what this was ultimately. It was never about riding bikes into the sunset and kids being safe. It was a question that was not in question. The question was, did we do this the right way? And we've been told time and again from the Land Use Board of Appeals, we did not. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for sharing your views on that. Before we dive further into talking about the latest LUBA decision, which I would prefer to first hear from our county council, if possible, before we get your perspective on it, though I appreciate you sharing your perspective, but I think it's important to hear from our staff about it. But with regard to an audit or having an outside firm look at it, I agree with you. I think that it would be good to hear about things like what's the cost, really what is it going to cost? What will we gain by buyback of materials, for example? How long, if you arrived on site, would a project take to go to completion? I agree with you. I think that that's a reasonable first step, Chair. I would like to hear from County Council about the LUBA decision. And I'd like to note that past boards, going back to Commissioner Burshauer's comments about the cost of this, or of an audit in general, past boards have been very clear with the county, with staff, that we want to minimize all cash outlays from the county. That's in many documents. You understand that. You have agreed to that, Chair, in the past. The county has been very careful, even like, well, we need to do some maintenance on the trail. Okay, can we do this with staff time? Can we do this with work crews? So as to minimize the cost, the cash outlay. So in order to get a firm number on what a project like this is going to cost, it would be great to have a master plan. So I just want to put that out there, that a master plan helps to develop a budget when it provides us with options for it. But at this point, I agree with you, Chair, on an engineering specific audit. I think it would be good to hear, to put together the scope of service, scope of work that we can get out for a bid. And then I'd love to hear at some point from Christian his thoughts on the LUBA decision. I do think that it's worth considering appealing it to the Court of Appeals. So with that, I'd love to hear from Christian, if you may.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burshauer, and then we'll get to Christian.
Sorry, Chair, did you say me go first?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So I obviously don't want to be spending any more money, throwing good money after bad. That's not my purpose. But I'm not sure that folks understand the gravity of where we are at. We are essentially being accused of fraud because the actions of the county proceeded with some of these grants without revealing the full legal impact of what we were going through. That is, we're being accused of fraud. You saw it come through in one of these emails. We have spent over $1 million on a bridge that doesn't even exist. So this audit is something that I feel we have no choice to do. We owe it to the taxpayers in this county to be able to answer the questions of where the heck did this money go? And it's not just targeted at Farline and the bridge construction. This goes back to Dowell as well. Where did the money go? $500,000 for planning a bridge and 2 culverts. So in my opinion, we are backed into a corner on this, and we owe it to the taxpayers to say, here's where it all went, here's where the mistakes were made, and here's how we would change things going forward. I don't want to spend a bunch of money, but I'm not the one who put us in this position. Neither are you, Commissioner Sterrett. It doesn't feel comfortable to be here, but I feel that we owe this to the taxpayers.
Thank you, Commissioner. Christian?
So yeah, let me just try to make sure I'm speaking on the topic that you want addressed. There still sounds like there's a discussion among the commissioners about the scope and the details around the audit. I don't know if you want to finish that conversation before we move on to the recent LUBA decision, or if there's more to be discussed about whatever kind of linkage might exist between those two. I think I'm hearing Commissioner Chair Sterrett and Commissioner Kula are more interested in proceeding with the initial engineering review that Ken described. I'm hearing Commissioner Burshauer express an interest in a broader, more comprehensive audit. But then I also heard you, Chair, ask for raise some concerns about how funds have been spent in some other stages of the project. So maybe it would be best to sort of come to a consensus on how we're going to proceed with the audit, and then I'd be more than happy to talk about the LUBA opinion on the attorney's fees.
Yes, I think we have to address the question of an audit and to what degree, what would the scope of an audit look like before we get into the LUBA consideration, because that would be incurring more costs if we were to appeal it. One of the things that I thought would be good information to have is what would it cost if we had more of a narrow scope. For instance, we were going to have Public Works Director and our own engineer take a look at that, and that would be internal, but they were not comfortable, nor did I think it was a good idea to put them in that position. So I'm glad that they came to this on their own. But also, they had some suggestions on who could look at it. So let's say if we said to a couple of engineers or an engineer, what we're looking for is the stage of completion, the materials, the buyback costs, some of that scope, so that we're not getting into a full-fledged forensic audit of the project itself. Not that I think there's no merit to that, because I think there is. I have a lot of questions, and I certainly don't have the expertise to answer any of them in terms of how the money was spent and this particular project alone. But if we had a cost as to what that narrower scope would run us, and then factor that into what we're looking for is what would it cost to have a full forensic audit of this project, the whole Connect 6, if that's what you're asking for, Commissioner Burshauer, the whole Connect 6.
Yes, Chair. And I think an RFP process does that in the most transparent way. We can put out a request for bids, that covers the whole thing, and it also can ask for pieces of that audit as well. So I am not necessarily comfortable with just someone being picked by staff to do this. I think the most transparent way that we can do it is to open it up for an RFP and say, other people can come in, and here's the scope of work that we're looking for. We might only choose to do part of it initially, but let's have some folks give us some bids on that.
So what is your recommendation as far as our initial narrower scope? Are you saying you're not comfortable with our Public Works engineer and Public Works Director making recommendations on an engineer that could do this narrower assessment?
What I'm saying is that that is going to cost money. An engineering firm costs money. So I think we need to be clear about what we're asking for, but I really truly believe that a comprehensive audit, financial audit, is warranted. So if that's part of the RFP, great. If we only choose to do a part of it initially, that's fine. I think we're going to have this conversation again in the future, but I just think the most transparent way to get there is to open it up for for bids from other people as well.
Even the engineering, if we were to decide on a narrower scope, open that up.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I think that it's, I'd like to see a narrower engineering specific audit if we're going to have one. And again, I want to come back to that I trust our staff, and if our county administrator trusts the process, I feel comfortable with the money and the design and the work that has been spent on this project. But to that end, Chair, I agree with you that I think that a smaller, narrowly defined audit that works with an engineering firm and our public works director is an appropriate next move. I think that I think it's reasonable that to heed Commissioner Burshauer's comments about an open bidding process for that. But typically, we when we have small, low dollar amounts of work, those are handled in-house with going to firms. I'm fine with considering the high-profile nature of this to do an RFP and have bids from engineering firms. But what I don't know is whether there are multiple engineering firms out there that would be interested in this, and county administrator may have more understanding of the types of firms that might do this based upon his conversations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ken?
Honestly, I don't know if I have anything more input that I could provide. I'm sorry, Commissioner. You know, because it really depends on the nature and the scope of what is either being audited or investigated is going to dictate the, you know, again, the questions that I posed, the narrow the scope, because the questions were specific around the bridge construction, the status of bridge construction, reviewing what had been invoiced to date and doing a review on that was specific to around the bridge construction. So that was the question posed. So of course, you know, if you're going to do an audit of the construction, you're going to get an engineer or engage with that versus a financial auditing, which is like we have our annual audit where we have an outside party that is contracted to come in and conduct our financial audits and look at process, budget, financial statements, things like that. So it all depends on the scope.
Thank you. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. Can we do both? Is there anything that says if we put out an RFP and we look at bids that we have to take one within a certain amount of time?
I'm not sure I understand the
Well,
question.
Ken was differentiating between an engineering firm versus a financial audit firm, which, you know, I can see the difference with that. But if we do two different RFPs, one is for, you know, a full-fledged financial audit, the other is for an engineering audit of the bridge and, you know, current status. Is there anything that says that we have to entertain one of the bids, or we have to go with one, or, you know, in any period of time?
So what will usually happen is they'll be out for a set amount of time. We determine how long is necessary, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the project. We're not obliged to award to any particular proposer. In an RFP, you're not limited by low price, so you can evaluate the different proposals that you get, rank them according to the scoring that would be in the RFP when it was released, and then we would go through a selection process. And generally what we do is have an evaluation committee that reviews the RFPs, ranks the proposers, and then makes a recommendation to the board. And sometimes it's a recommendation to award to a single proposer. Sometimes there are a couple of finalists that we might want to do some further interviews with. I think one of the things that could be a challenge here is finding a single vendor who could do both of those things well, right? I know there are, for example, law firms and accounting firms that do more of the financial accounting side. Moss Adams comes to mind, and we hired a firm several years ago to do an audit in another department. I don't know that those folks would be the experts to take a look at the engineering questions that the board has posed. So that would be one concern I think we'd have to work with. Not that we couldn't, you know, possibly craft an RFP to ask a single auditor to present us with a proposal where they might subcontract some of the specific engineering questions or some of the more specific financial questions to a subcontractor. We could do that. Obviously, that's going to be a more complex and likely a more costly package than if we proceeded first with an engineering evaluation and then perhaps later decided to move to a more comprehensive financial audit. Another question I had for you, Commissioner Burshauer, is you'd mentioned that you might also want to see as part of a broader review of the whole Connect 6 grant, invoicing, the scope of work, and also LUBA. Again, that's moving significantly beyond what we had initially discussed. I think we would need to spend some additional time determining what the scope of that larger audit would be. If you're wanting to look at the financial pieces beyond the bridge construction, say for the bridge design or the contract management piece that we had with Dowell, we could incorporate that. Beyond that, I think there's some questions that we would need to answer to make sure that we're presenting a scope of work to a provider or to a potential auditor that's within their wheelhouse. And we can have that conversation now, or we can have some offline conversations and then maybe come back to the board with a more detailed package. But I think we need to spend some more time fleshing that out too.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And there's a lot of frustration because most parts of this project are completely falling apart. And so I can understand how my comment about LUBA, you know, makes things more complicated. I think on a basic level, a financial audit is the starting point of what I'm after. However, I also think that an engineering audit of the bridge would potentially inform the need for a larger financial audit. So, but I just want to, I would like to see how much a full-fledged financial audit of the Connect 6 grant and expenditures would cost. It's simply information. I don't think it's going to be harmful to do that. But I do want to state too that I'm not necessarily wanting an audit of the bridge for the purposes of finishing the bridge. So, you know, that could be simply that we get feedback that doesn't necessarily match what we were told. And we're still going to proceed with dismantling the bridge and moving on from this. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make that clear that it doesn't mean that we are necessarily going to finish the bridge. So we could be spending money that simply tells us that our internal information was wrong.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. And that's the piece that I would be interested in as far as this sort of the micro look will inform a macro look if we decide to do that. What I really like to see, knowing how expensive these processes are, they can be enormously expensive. I understand the need for it. I think this should have been done years ago. But I was sort of the Lone Ranger and I just kind of kept harping on this stuff and I got nowhere. But the bottom line is that I'm really adverse to throwing good money after bad. And if we take this huge chunk of money to do an audit to say that once again, we goofed or we didn't have eyes on this appropriately or whatever it is, maybe everything does add up. But to spend a bunch of money, again, when we're looking at trying to clean up this mess, I'm just concerned about that. So a dollar amount would help me make a decision. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a dollar figure specifically for the narrowly focused would be my recommendation. I think in agreement with you. I do want to note that the bridge project, as well as the larger conditional use permit application and project for a trail, fell apart because there wasn't adequate level of support at the Board of Commissioners. That's where it ended, is right here. And to pass it, I recognize that it's easier to pass it off on other people, but it did end here, and we do have the choice, if we wanted to move forward with it, to finish a bridge, to work on completing the trail. But I realize that that's not under discussion right now.
No, I understand, but I just want to make it clear that what ended here is what should have ended years ago, meaning this project is there will be ongoing litigation. We've been promised that. We've had several remands from LUBA. When you talk now about an additional appeal, which is going to cost more money, so in your mind, Commissioner, we just need to sit at that table and use the House money to play, to play roulette, to gamble, high stakes gambling. And so when you say it ended here, as if to say that what past boards and past decisions that brought us to a point now, I didn't appeal this, and I didn't remand it back to the county. I simply asked some questions, and that has led us to where we are now, is that there will be ongoing litigation, and to expect the taxpayers to be on the hook for a project that might never be completed, but we're going to feed it using taxpayer dollars. That's why it ended. Not because I didn't want a trail to go in, but because we had to put a tourniquet on this thing because it's going to bleed out. Anyway.
Okay, thank you for sharing your perspective. I appreciate hearing from you specifically.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burshauer, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Commissioner Kula, I have to take issue with what you said. This thing has been a train wreck from the beginning, and I think the 4 remands, display that quite clearly, as well as the latest LUBA order that basically says the county was, putting forth non-meritorious, legal arguments the entire time, to the point where we have an unprecedented judgment against us to pay back all of these attorney fees. This thing was a mess from the beginning. It doesn't make it the fault of the commissioners who are putting a stop to the bleeding, nor being the responsible ones in the room saying, we can't continue to see this happen. We can't continue to bleed these dollars. So I take issue with what you said. This thing has been a train wreck from the beginning.
And we have a difference of opinion about that, and thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. All right, so at this point, direction to staff would be to maybe get an idea of the narrower scope, and also I would be interested in an estimate of what a forensic audit would cost. Again, I think those two are important. Again, if it's a big dollar amount, I'm going to be less likely to be in support of a forensic audit. I think we've already seen that there have been a lot of mistakes made, and I don't know how we're going to go back and undo that, because what should have happened didn't happen all along the way. So I don't know. Can we get an idea of what Christian?
So yeah, one way we might pursue that would be to ask a handful of engineering firms what it would cost to conduct the narrower scope audit, and we could reach out to a number of other auditors or accounting firms that do the larger scale forensic audits. And again, in order to get as accurate a sense of cost and price there, we're going to need to flesh out what the scope of that broader audit would be. But then once we have that, I think we could certainly ask a handful of vendors what that kind of a audit might cost, come back to the board, and then get some further direction from the board on whether or not you'd like us to pursue a solicitation for the narrower or the broader scoped audit.
So commissioners, do we have consensus? I just want to make sure we have clarification here to get an idea for a solicitation for the narrower scope, and then based on that would inform what we decide going forward on either the bridge or a Fuller Connect 6 audit.
Chair, I think that getting numbers is helpful. Commissioner Burshauer has proposed several, or an option. You have expressed concern, I think rightly so, with a large scale expenses for that. And I think that having numbers is a reasonable next step.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burshauer, does that seem along the lines of at least getting to some place where we can decide what the next larger step would be?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it does. And my only concern with that part was that it be as transparent as possible and open to the public for bids, so that we can, those are all forward facing and we can see them and make a decision from that point.
Thank you. Christian?
Yeah, Commissioner Burshauer, are you interested in making sure that even the estimates that we're receiving from folks are made available, or are you talking more about the solicitation process that might follow once we come back with those cost estimates?
Christian, my concern is that we're not handpicking somebody to do it. I think for transparency, it's open, the process is open, and we take multiple bidders and then we sort of go from there. So
yeah, we wouldn't be handpicking. We would do a competitive solicitation that would be open to anyone who wanted to bid. I thought what I was hearing from the board, though, was that you were interested in getting some initial cost estimates on what the narrower scope audit would cost and what the broader scope audit would cost before we went out to bid. Am I incorrect on that?
I was just wondering if you can get that information prior to a scope of work and a contract.
I mean, I think we have a scope of work for the narrower audit. I'm just not sure we have a scope of work for the broader audit yet. So we could certainly ask, Public Works again, if they've got some other engineering firms that they work with who we could go out and ask for some cost estimates from. I also think we could do an RFP right now for the narrower audit and see what sort of pricing comes back. Trying to do what it is the board is most interested in doing.
Ken?
My preference would be if there is trust issues and concerns about staff handling it. My preference would be that if we're going to do it, we're going to do a solicitation to whoever we can look up and not involve Public Works into this. My preference would not be to have them further involved. Again, with some of the statements that have been made and and I just want to be clear, if we're putting together a scope of work, I think the other part we're going to need to talk about is process and how that goes. And I think the first step is going to be developing that scope of work and putting together a solicitation and advertising to get that feedback if there's concerns moving forward.
Commissioner Burshauer?
Thank you, Chair. I think if the engineering audit is a little easier because we've sort of already determined where the scope of work is, then let's get that one rolling. But I still would like to see an estimate on a full-fledged audit of the Connect 6 grant. It's simply information for us in order to move forward or not. And I think it's a very key piece of information considering what's happened so far.
Thank you for that.
In terms of keeping things moving, the quickest way to do that might just be to craft the scope of work for both of these projects and get them out there, because through the RFP process, we'll get pricing. They'll tell us what they would charge us, and that's going to be as accurate as anything else. So if we can, again, we can have the discussion now if you'd like, or have some discussions offline on what the scope of work for the broader audit might look like. And then we can just go ahead and put out a couple of RFPs for both and use that. If the concern is to get as independent a look at this scope of work from as broad an outside group of experts as possible, that may be the best way to approach it.
Thank you, Christian. I think instead of couching it as a trust issue, I think in any agency, any government agency, we look to have outside eyes making determinations, because Public Works was not comfortable doing this. They were being asked to do something that would put them in an uncomfortable position. And I don't think that has anything to do with the trust issue so much as it is, are we really asking an inside agency to make an assessment about the same agency's work? And I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to them. So I would prefer that we not look at this as we don't trust staff, but in any government agency, you don't typically have each other looking at each other's work. I think that there's a reason why we have the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. I think that's why we have Secretary of State auditing various departments so that they can bring in different eyes, and they can be very critical of those departments. And I think we have to be open to that. And that, again, is not to disparage staff. So I just want to weigh in with that particular piece. Commissioner Kula?
Thank you, Chair. Isn't the Secretary of State essentially, I mean, I realize that one is led by an elected official, but wouldn't that be equivalent here of one department looking at the activity of another department?
Well, what's interesting about the way the Secretary of State's audit division is supposed to work, if you've ever read some of their audits in the past, they have been sometimes very scathing indictments of various departments. So when you look at those and say, yeah, they do have the ability to do that as a separate entity, they're not necessarily rubber stamping everything an agency does. In this particular case, we're asking county employees to make an assessment of other county employees, in other words, pass judgment. So I don't know that it's necessarily fair to do that. So why we can't bring in someone else to say, hey, you don't know anything about this, there hasn't been the controversy, and you're not biased either way. Take a look at the mechanics of this project. I wasn't comfortable with asking Public Works to begin with.
Okay, thank you. For some reason, I thought we were talking about this bridge and the construction of it and the engineering of it and the grant, the spending of money on it.
Right, we were talking about that, Commissioner, but at the end of the day, the buck stops here. And if there was an assessment by someone in Public Works, i.e. an engineer or a Public Works director, that made an assessment that there were some egregious invoice errors, or perhaps the company that we had contracted with to do the oversight and the project management had not been forthcoming or had not done the job that we hired them to do, ultimately the buck stops with us. And we would be the ones it would be an indictment on us. So when we say we don't want to bring in staff to look at something that maybe you could turn around and say, hey, this stuff happened on your watch. That would be the commissioners, that would be staff. I don't know that we want to do that. Ultimately, doesn't the buck stop with us? And if we do have a project that we were charged for and the project wasn't completed according to the way we had outlined it, or there were some discrepancies, wouldn't we want to know that ultimately that the citizens know that it ends with us? We can't keep blaming someone else for it.
I think I've lost you in there a little bit, but you know, to go back to this, we received money from ODOT. We received approval for a grant from ODOT. We hired a bridge builder and an engineering firm. We oversaw them. So are you? It sounds like you're concerned with the oversight rather than the bridge building. Are you concerned with both of those? Because the bridge building would be external to the county. Nobody at the county built the bridge. So us looking at it is us having oversight of them, right?
No, what I'm saying is that when we enter into a contract with contractors and with people who do project management, ultimately, we're responsible for whether or not we did our due diligence to make sure what were we paying? Was this something that was appropriate? Was it according to what the timeline was? So with every project we do, I'm going to bring up the courthouse painting again. When we do that, we contract someone, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're responsible to see that they did the job, that they did what we asked them, and they didn't overcharge us, and they got it done according to what they said they were. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I got it. So in this case, this bridge project, though, it's not complete, right? So it would be like if they never finished painting it because we told them to stop painting it, right?
We didn't stop. Luba told them. We didn't say stop. Luba told them to stop. Okay, number one. Okay, that's an important distinction. Number two is if in the course of looking at the project where the courthouse was not, let's say DEQ or EPA came in and said, you need to stop painting over there because there's toxic fumes going into the jury room. we would want to make sure at the end of the day that the part that they did finish was according to a timeline, that the number of paint cans lined up with what they charged us for. And all I'm saying is that our facilities manager is going to be the one that we're going to look to say, hey, Joe, did this actually happen according to what you thought it would?
Right. So if we're continuing with that, who would Joe be in this case? Because ultimately our county administrator is the one signing off on approval for all the expenses and then sending that on to ODOT. So we have county staff, which I believe was Carrie Martin, and then we have county administrator, and then we have ODOT, right? So in theory, then Joe would be Carrie, and then Ken would be Ken.
Well,
Right.
I'm certainly not saying that at this point we're pointing fingers at any particular person on staff, and I hope that you're not inferring that, because that's not what I said and it's not what I'm saying. What I am saying that the county as a whole is ultimately responsible for any contracts we enter into. And we have to have eyes on those, and we have to be able to explain what happened. All we're doing with this process is asking for an explanation from someone, because there are questions about this bridge. Let's face it, there are some questions about this bridge. We didn't order a stop. LUBA ordered the stop. So we find ourselves in this predicament. How are we going to make any kind of an assessment as to whether or not the project was done according to what we contracted for?
Okay, thank you. Any relevant answer from reply back would lead us down the trail of the donkey getting in the ditch, I think is what you would say. So
I was trying not to say that.
I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate, I understand, and I also just want to make it clear that I trust staff. I've seen lots of emails. I've been involved in lots of discussions. I trust their oversight of this project. But I'd also like to make sure that we get to discussing the LUBA fee at some point too.
Right. And I certainly by asking for a look at what Farline has done and what Dowell has done, that is not an indictment on staff. Absolutely. If anyone, it would be taking a look at what Dowell did, okay, and what Farline did. This is not to say that our staff has to be able to be experts in bridge building and in bridge construction and in project management for a major project like that. That's why we hired Dowell. So maybe Dowell's who we need to look at. That's all I'm saying. It was never an indictment on staff, and no one will be a bigger defender of our county administrator. No one will be a bigger defender of the man who sits in that office right now. And I have never said anything that would disparage him, and I'm saying it again today. So I hope we're not going to walk away with that as being the narrative for today. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, but I would like to acknowledge that there is lack of trust, and the lack of trust is from the public towards the county. Based on what they're seeing, what they're reading in the papers, what's coming out of this project, there is a lack of trust. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not really doing our jobs. I do have a question about the latest Farline invoice for 41,000 something. Was that paid?
It has not been processed yet.
Okay. Can we not pay that while we're in the middle of discussing all of this kind of stuff? Because it seemed like there were a lot of items on there that where it wasn't for work performed, it was things that they were being told to bill for. So I want to make sure that we're not just authorizing this kind of stuff and paying them in their invoices. We're in the middle of discussion about auditing them. It's a very awkward.
I am currently, I held the invoice because there were items on that invoice that were along the lines of closing out the project, and we still have some questions about those items. I don't know if Farline is gonna, we have an invoice in hand and it's past due, but in recognizing that you know, we may hear from Farline on the status of the invoice. But for right now, because there are some closeout items and that were in there, I still have it on my desk and we haven't processed for payment yet.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Burshauer. I do think that we owe it to our contractors by our contract to pay for the things that they have done, as long as it's gone through the approval process and the oversight process that we've established. Paying for things that we have not yet decided the timeline on might be something to consider holding off on. And perhaps we can ask County Administrator to communicate with. I don't want to put more work on you, Ken, but I do want to make sure that we pay for the things that they have, the work that they have done in accordance with the timeline of our contract.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, so at this point, Christian, do you have a clear understanding, clear as mud, of what we've been going around and around on the scope of work for perhaps an initial assessment of the bridge?
At this point, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll just work on preparing a statement of our scope of work for both.
Okay, for both. All right.
And then we can present those to the board, have conversations, and then if we're in agreement on what those look like, then we can go ahead and solicit for costs from potential vendors.
Are you talking about a scope of work for Connect 6 or for the bridge?
Both.
No. I mean the larger.
Yes, we would be doing a scope of work for the narrower audit and a scope of work for the broader audit.
Okay, but the broader audit, does it include the whole Connect 6? Is that the whole?
Yes, and that's what needs to be worked out in the scope of work.
Okay, got it.
But I believe it will, because I think that's what I'm hearing Commissioner Burshauer ask, is that it would be a full financial audit of the Connect 6 grant.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Sorry, Chair and Christian, I meant to respond to your comment, but I don't know that I'm prepared to talk about what the scope should be or what should be in it or ideas or whatever right now. But if we want to schedule something for that, I can do some prep work on that too, and we can have a different discussion. But
okay, thank you.
Maybe not right now.
All right, so can we move on from this right now? We really don't need a board action, do we? Just a consensus to ask staff to take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the LUBA, the latest communication from LUBA telling us that we need to come up with 50 grand to pay the appellant's court costs, attorney's fees. Yeah. And I know that, Christian, go ahead.
Sure. I've certainly heard a lot from the board today about your concerns and frustrations with that opinion. I can certainly tell you that both Todd and I are as equally frustrated, maybe for slightly different reasons. But we were surprised, to say the least, at LUBA's decision. You know, we have throughout this process done what a majority of the board asked us to do, which was to pursue the development of the trail, pursue these grants and pursue these projects. And I am confident that throughout this process, we have put forth reasonable, legally defensible arguments for the elements of the project that the board has asked us to move forward. In the end, LUBA disagreed. You know, although in their opinion, they did in several instances cite two areas where they did agree with the arguments that we were making, which makes the final opinion that much more difficult to understand and accept. But it is LUBA's opinion. You know, obviously we disagree. There were several arguments that we made that if we wanted to get into more detail, Todd is certainly here to do that. But we made several arguments that LUBA failed to address in their opinion to our satisfaction. But again, they are the regulatory agency. They are the regulatory body, and that's the decision that they made. As I think has been mentioned before, there is a process by which the county could appeal the attorney's fee award. in discussing it with Todd, in his entire years of practice, this is the first time an attorney's fee award has been made where we were the non-prevailing party. So it is highly unusual. I don't know to what extent the amount is an unprecedented amount. It is certainly the first time I have been involved with an attorney's fee award of this size. And so there is that. Obviously, we disagree with Luba's opinion, but it is what it is. We had agreement from ODOT, we had agreement from DOJ, we had agreement internally that moving forward with the construction of this bridge was legal and legally defensible. And there is always risk in this adversarial process. We've discussed that with the board at every step of the way. But up until this year, we had a board that was supportive of the project, so it was our obligation to do what we could to keep that project moving forward, just as it is our obligation now to assist the board in whatever way it wants to reevaluate, reassess, move away from, make different decisions related to the trail, and we will continue to do that. So suffice it to say, we're as disappointed as you are about Luba's decision.
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christian. Since we have heard from people who are likely in public comment emails, through people who are likely petitioners or clients of the attorney, I would appreciate hearing from our Land Use County Counsel his views of the decision itself. I think it would be helpful for fully informing the board.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Todd, are you able to join us just to respond to the?
Yeah, you should be able to come up from the waiting room.
Okay.
More of that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure that we talked about. Right?
There he is.
That's right. Here we go.
All right, Todd is here. Todd, we were just talking a little bit about hearing from, obviously you made the arguments that Luba is taking exception to, and ergo we have a bill for 50 grand. So you said, I mean, it's never happened before. So can you explain a little bit about what your perspective is on their decision?
Well, I didn't agree with the original decision that they made, that is the underlying decision upon which the attorney fees are based. Essentially, we argued that a land use and the determination of whether you need a permit for it should be based on what the structure is to be used for. And we represented that we needed to get land use authority for the bridge for a long time, and that's because we needed a floodplain development permit in order to build the bridge. Once we got the letter of map amendment from FEMA, we no longer needed a floodplain development permit in order to build the bridge. And we were still in the process of getting the conditional use permit, but we had represented at every stage of that process that no trail use would be made until everything was in: the fencing, the signage, the master plan, all of these things before anyone could step foot legally and at our invitation onto that bridge or any other part of that corridor. And so once we got to the point where we didn't have the conditional use permit in hand, but we're still trying to get it, we got the letter of map amendment. We had already spent $500,000 developing the plans for this bridge, and we decided that we believed that we could go forward so long as the bridge, and it's where it is, it's behind two locked gates. There's no way the public can get to it at this point. And we believed, and I think in good faith, that we were entitled to go ahead and start construction of the bridge, which we did. We presented that to the board, and my apologies, I don't think we talked about attorney fees because, to tell you the truth, in my now almost 40 years of practicing law in the state of Oregon, I did not believe that there was much of a chance of that happening. And my apologies for that. That's a mistake that I made, and I own it. But in terms of whether I believe that we had probable cause to go forward, I continue to believe that we had probable cause. I did not propose or request from you that you allow me to appeal that decision. And so the decision stood. And the reason for that is that we believed that we could go forward and by summer get the conditional use permit and get through the appeal process. And if we needed another remand, we would have time to do that, that we were very close, that we have prevailed on most of the arguments we've made about farm impacts, and that we believe that we could get the final permits and complete the bridge in due course. So that's the approach that we took at the time. And I could say that if we had appealed that, they may have spent another $47,000 defending that. And yes, a lot of money's been thrown at this by a handful of opponents. And part of that has been a lot of personal attacks on staff, a lot of hyperbole about the potential damages from it. But our feeling was that the bridge itself, which would have provided us with access for fire control and maintenance of the corridor, that the bridge itself doesn't present any farm impacts. So we disagreed with the stay, and I continue to disagree. I don't believe that the stay was based on irreparable harm. We disagree on the outcome of that case, and absolutely disagree on the award of the attorney fees here. But again, it's a slap on my wrist by LUBA, a state agency that has the right to do that. I don't think that they have the right to tell the county what does and does not require a permit in Yamhill County. DLCD is responsible for acknowledgement. DLCD is responsible for telling us which ordinances we need to have and which ones we don't. We don't have a permit requirement for a bridge, an access road, or culverts for an access road. It's what the road is going to be used for that must get the permit. And in this case, we were actively seeking the permit for what that bridge might be used for later. And we, in good faith, believed that we could use the bridge for what we're using it for now.
Thank you, Todd.
Any questions about that? Or
Commissioner Kula.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Todd, for laying that out. There seemed to be, when I talked to Christian about this, there seemed to be some confusion about who the prevailing, like how there was a prevailing party. Are you able to go into any of those details now, or is that something that would be better for an executive session?
Well, they won the case, Commissioner. That's really all it takes to be a prevailing party.
Oh, okay. I guess Christian expressed something differently, so maybe I'll just talk with him later.
Oh, the question, I think whether or not it lacked probable cause when you see the things that they said we were correct on, but somehow we were not correct. And I think that's something that we're still trying to analyze.
Because their wording says, we conclude that the county's entire responsive presentation on the merits is not supported by probable cause.
That's right. In a decision in which they do not even cite the arguments that I made. So it's an interesting decision, at least. This is a relatively new board, and I'm not sure how many times they faced awarding attorney fees. I think the attorney who wrote the opinion probably has, or the referee who wrote the opinion probably has experience with it, and she's obviously got an opinion about it.
Well, thank you. The problem is that when you get slapped on the hands, we get slapped on the hands, and it's a cost to the county. Same thing with when they issued a stay. When LUBA issued a stay, there were a lot of expenses that were incurred because the construction had to stop. So when LUBA makes their decisions, which is I think what's sort of every one of my arguments was, hey guys, this could happen. Could we think about that? Is that when they do that, it costs us money. And that's kind of why I was in favor of putting that tourniquet on. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you,
Agree,
Chair. I
Commissioner.
just want to clarify, Commissioner Burshauer did raise her hand, but I raised it earlier. I just want to make sure that acknowledge. Todd, this might be a question for an executive session, which is about appealing to the Court of Appeals. And I guess it would be partly the question would be the likelihood of success, and then what it would cost in terms of your staff time. But just your time, how much time do you think?
I don't have a firm estimate on appeals. I mean, I've handled dozens of appeals to the Court of Appeals during my lifetime, and I have not had to keep track of the time on one for a while. It's something that usually, I guess, I think that I spend, I think I spend a lot of time, but I haven't looked at it's abuse of discretion, and I haven't looked at the cases that describe what an abuse of discretion is on the part of LUBA. So I can't. I'd be hard pressed right now to give you an estimate of how long it would take to write a Court of Appeals brief for that, and a reply brief likely, and oral argument. Those are the three components of an appeal.
Okay, thank you.
And then if in your argument you were not able to prevail, we'd be paying these attorney fees and the attorney fees associated with an appeal.
That's very possible, Commissioner, yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. It seems like throughout this whole process that the argument from the petitioners as well as the response from LUBA has centered around the fact that this bridge is kind of inextricably linked to the trail. And it goes back to the grant itself, where the grant was for the purpose of the design of a bridge and 2 culverts and the construction of the bridge for the purpose of the Yamhill West Sider Trail. It's very simply stated in that. So it seems like that's been a reoccurring theme. It certainly was the expectation of the public that this bridge was for the Yamhill West Sider Trail. And LUBA in the order cites it again and says it was an unreasonable post hoc argument to say that the bridge was not for that purpose, that it was simply for emergency access or what have you. And I have said previously that the county never would have engaged in building a $500,000 bridge simply for access to that right-of-way. There's no reason for the county to have access to the right-of-way if not for a trail. So this really isn't that surprising. It's sad and it's unprecedented, but I am not going to support an appeal. I think enough damage has been done. I'm not willing to waste any more taxpayer money on this, and I'm certainly not willing to put the petitioners in a position where they have to pay even more legal fees. So that's a non-starter for me. And Ken, I was going to ask you, what is the process for this? LUBA in the order didn't give any sort of timeline or structure for paying this. So how does that work?
Well, we have 21 days to determine whether we want to appeal. So that's the first deadline, and that would be April 22nd.
Commissioner Kula?
Thank you. And then I do believe that Todd has adequately expressed the need for a bridge, an access point for accessing our own property. I think that we've all seen it both in arguments and applications and just now. I do like to note that we just had a conversation about spending money on an audit. So there's a willingness of the Board of Commissioners to express an interest in spending money on one aspect of it. I think we have an opportunity to be in the right here with appealing.
Thank you, Commissioner. As I've said all along, every time LUBA comes back and tells us we got it wrong, ultimately it costs the county money. And this is another example for us to turn around and sit again at the same craps table and say, well, we're going to go all in because we've been sitting here long enough. We want to get our money back. We want to be able to, it's like if you're sitting there playing slots and you're losing, but a few more dollars in there and you're going to hit it. And we're sitting at those same slot machines and we're just going to keep throwing money. Again, we're playing with the house's money and we're not playing with our own. So it's very easy to say, let's go ahead, keep fighting, keep pushing, keep litigating. And this is litigating until when? When do we say enough is enough? Would there be a time where we would say, as a county, that we can't continue to litigate these things?
Madam Chair, we're down to a handful of issues on this case when we gave it up, and that's the reality of it. Complex cases often have more than one remand. And certainly I've been engaged in complex cases before that had more than one remand. So that's not surprising. There was a light at the end of the tunnel on the issues of this case. Yes, we have been at the table litigating against what I consider to be a handful of opponents with a lot of money. And that has led us to be in this position of having a delay that has lasted 3 years. So that has been the outcome. I agree with that. And my apology for not doing a better job for the county.
Thank you, Todd. Commissioner Kula, did you want to say something?
That was what I was going to say, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Burshauer?
Chair, thank you. I don't really have anything good to say at this point. So,
Okay, Christian.
I'm simply going to say that I think that we need to determine as commissioners whether we're going to appeal or not. My vote is a very clear no, and then figure out how we're going to remedy this decision.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, I was simply gonna point out, you know, this whole project has been a complicated and became a more controversial project the longer it went on, and this latest situation is further complicated by the fact that for the first time in the life of the project at the start of 2021, we now have a board that is majority opposed to the project. So it is unfortunate that we are where we are, but as Todd has said, these sorts of attempts to now try and remedy what was started in the past, and I think the new board has made it clear that you don't intend to move forward with the project, and so now it's incumbent on us to try and do the best we can to assist the board in taking the steps that it further wants to take in this new direction.
So do we need a vote on the appeal, or is consensus sufficient?
Consensus.
Consensus.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, it doesn't sound like we have a majority of the board interested in pursuing an appeal. If not, then we will look at the mechanics of how and when a repayment would need to be made.
Yeah, I'm not in favor. Again, it's at some point, you know, we have to stop this back and forth, the litigation, and then I don't see an end to it. So I'm not in favor of an appeal. Commissioner Kula.
Let's let Commissioner Burshauer say something.
Commissioner.
I lost my arrow. There we go. I was just going to ask Ken, you know, where does this money come from? Whose budget or what fund, or where does this money come from when we pay it back?
That's a determination to make. Typically when we have claims or anything that's litigation related, we're usually into Fund 80 Insurance Reserve is one of the funds that we would look at as far as making the payments from. Would
this be considered a damages? So I'm assuming CIS doesn't get involved, but is there anything that would allow us to consider this a claim against the county and then address it that way?
That's how I was going to see it. It's a claim. It's a judgment that was issued against the county. So I was looking at it as insurance reserve. We have some lines for claims and settlements and things like that that may come up throughout the year.
Thank you.
It would not be in the nature of a tort claim, so it would not be something that would be covered under our CIS insurance.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, so we have direction on that, and I believe we can move forward if that's okay with everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. We will move on to department updates. We have none. We do have a consent.
Oh, hold on, sorry. Ken, a county administrator needed to add something, it looked like.
Oh, go ahead. Ken.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Before we moved out of the work session, the only thing that I just want to remind the board that, you know, because I know we're having a lot of discussions about doing a review of the grant project and the current LUBA decision, but there's still some outstanding items that the board, that staff is going to need some direction from the board to begin, you know, closing things on certain elements or what the next steps are going to be. I just want to remind that we still have an open question on the master plan process, because that is still a grant program that it's in a holding pattern. We, you know, and I'll be coming back with the information from ODOT and some of those items and some budgetary actions that need to occur. And I just wanted to just put a reminder that we do have some action items or some decisions that are going to need to be made here pretty soon, so we can start making the necessary arrangements to follow through on that.
So do you want to do those today, or do we want to arrange to discuss them next week in terms of specifics regarding master plan and the grants?
Well, I know the grants, that'll be something that I'll more than likely have the information from ODOT, and we'll have that discussion for next week. It's up to the board on how you want to proceed with the master plan, if you want to discuss it next week, or if there's information that you would like staff to have prepared for that discussion. You know, I'd be open to getting that feedback now, and then we can be prepared to talk about it next week. Or I just think that with the decisions that have been made, and there are certain items that that we need to start, you know, staff wise, I need to be able to figure out what the next steps are going to be on what direction we're giving to providers, contractors, and the next steps.
Thank you, I understand. Would it be your preference that we hold off on discussion of the master plan until next week? Or is there anything, commissioners, that you would like staff to know in advance of that discussion if we do wait till next week? Commissioner Burshauer?
Thank you, Chair. I thought we had already discussed the master plan and determined that we were not going to proceed with spending more funds on that. That was my understanding.
Was there anything in addition to that, Ken, that you needed from us?
My apologies, but I just don't remember there being consensus or any type of formal action taken by the board that gave that directive to staff.
We did discuss, but we never did actually make any kind of decision formally. So if we want to do that today, we can do it. Otherwise, we can wait till next week. I know that one of the things that I had hoped that we in this project initially, to go back in the Wayback Machine again, is that we'd done this earlier on, and it would have precluded, I think, a lot of the issues that we had. It would have been nice for everybody to know, and I think that a lot of problems could have been avoided. But that being said, it didn't happen. So we do have a master plan that we can't continue to do if there is not going to be a trail forthcoming, and I think that's where the rub comes. Commissioner Kula?
I wanted to make sure you were done. Did you? You were completed?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I do want to note that because the Board of Commissioners historically has added a policy of using as few dollars as possible of general fund economic development money, we've always sought out grants and then looked for the ones with the smallest local match, looked for matches. We could have done a master plan really right away, is my understanding. I wasn't around for it, if we had chosen to use county funds for it. Now we find ourselves in a position where we delayed that process because we didn't get a grant. Again, historically, you would know more than me about this. And now we're here potentially spending $100,000 more to shut down a project. And I just want to note that it feels like a little bit icky. I guess there's a bitter taste in my mouth that perhaps we should have gone forward. And again, I wasn't there, so I'm speaking about the past, about having a master plan that was funded by the county.
Thank you. And again, I was the Lone Ranger on all of these votes, so it was pretty much the majority of the board which brought us to these places. I didn't have any, other than what I said, there was really no input since everyone can count and 2 against 1. So really the board's decisions at the time brought us to these places. So we can again go back and say, point fingers and all of that. We're here.
Chair,
Yeah.
would you have been open to spending money on a master plan? I don't know, in 2017, I think is when the acquisition was being finalized.
I think what I would have been open to is at least more input and more communication with neighboring landowners to preclude some of the concerns that they had. And I think that's really where we fell down. We could have built a lot of bridges, so to speak, with people. And I think, maybe we could have worked something out. So no, I would not have been in favor of spending money until we'd had some consensus from people what we were looking at. Were we going to face litigation? Then I had to start backing off years ago.
Okay, that's a helpful perspective.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, Christian.
I'm sorry, Ken reminded me of one other topic that we had briefly discussed next week, and we, if the board's willing to spend another 5 minutes, may be able to give staff enough direction that we can start working on this matter. It's the bus barn property, and whether or not there is consensus from the board that at the moment the most appropriate option would be to try and continue to move forward with a lease of the property to either the current tenant, which is the Belts, and then if those negotiations break down, then we can come back and look at what it might take for the county to either take the property over and lease it directly to the bus barn or others ourselves, or pursue a potential lease to another tenant. If the board's okay with that direction, what I would initially do is then renew my conversations with the Belts and see if we can't come to terms with them on a renewed lease of the property.
Is this something that would be better discussed in executive session because we're looking at the specifics of real estate?
I think eventually, yes. I think all I would be interested in hearing from the board today is if there is general consensus from the board that we move in the direction of pursuing a new lease with the Belts, then I can continue to have those conversations and negotiations with them that we've been having over the last several months. And then once we have enough additional detail about the lease specifics, then perhaps it would be appropriate to come back and go into executive session to talk about those specifics.
I would be in favor of moving in the direction of renewing the lease and then seeing where that leads. I know there are a lot of obstacles to that. Commissioner Kula.
Chair, thank you. Christian, I think that any comments that I would have or giving staff direction would really be things that would be most appropriate for an executive session around real estate negotiations. I just don't, I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment otherwise.
Thank you. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also in favor of moving forward with a lease renewal for the Belt family. But we were waiting on some information in terms of, how long have they been paying property taxes on their buildings and how long, was there any sort of transaction on record with the county clerk? And so far I haven't seen any of that. I know I got a couple of responses, but I haven't had time to dig into them. So, in general, I think a lease is a good avenue, but I agree we probably need to go into executive.
Okay, I can speak to some of the tax question. We've been working with the assessor and we're still trying to nail down to make certain that we have the full scope of potential taxes that the Belts or their entity Beltview Farms might be paying on the property. What we have so far suggests that the only taxes that are being paid on the small portion of the warehouse building, not the granary building, but the warehouse building, on that 700 square feet within the warehouse building that is being leased to the bus barn. And if the numbers we're getting from the assessor are correct, the taxes for last year on that small office were $50.58. We're still trying to make sure that there aren't any other taxes being assessed for the other improvements on the property. That number seems low, but we're still trying to nail that down. And then to your second point about a transaction being recorded in the clerk's office, that's the kind of information I've been asking Mr. Belt for. And if the board gives me the direction, I would go back and ask again for that information. And hopefully we'll be provided any documentation that the Belt family might have on what they may have paid for those buildings when they took the property over, or what they've got invested in them, or whether they've, whether any of the buildings on the property are mortgaged, what those mortgage payments might look like. And then also confirm through them, hopefully, what the taxes are that they're paying on the property. And those would be the questions I'd be following up on with the Belts going forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. And good question, Commissioner Burshauer. I mean, you know these are good questions, but I just want to acknowledge that. I do want to say, here and now that I want to make sure that the bus company retains their opportunity to use this property, and I'd honestly like to see it at if what they're paying is above or below market price. I just want to make sure that we are supporting our school safe transportation with our lease if we can, and I also want to make sure that we as a county are being made whole and leasing this property at a fair market value. So I want to make sure bus company can stay there. And then a third thing is that we received an email expressing interest in using some part of, I think, the granary specific part of it for, the Bram Yofi bakery and mill operation. And since Commissioner Starrett and I have long supported, both with votes and our words, their presence in the county and their innovation, I hope we can take that into consideration when we're talking about leases. But beyond that, I want to make sure that the things I say go into executive session.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to be really careful. I have been really supportive of that project. And I found it really sad that they had to pull the plug on that, because they knew they had to end the litigation that they couldn't afford, which again is that throwing good money after bad. That was a beautiful project and a beautiful partnership, I think. And I was really disappointed to see what happened there. So I would like to see them stay in the county and work, but I want to make sure that we are not taking anybody and putting them in the pole position in a process that really does need to be really transparent, where we're not jumping the line. So while I might be biased toward that project, we really can't be doing this at this point.
And then, Chair, along those lines, are you proposing that we open up this lease to the general public for leasing in general? That seems like it could be the good next step, rather than continuing on this path of very slow negotiation with folks.
What I am saying, Commissioner, is if we are going to be entertaining other people's presence on that property and leases or sales, that we don't just single someone out, because it has some wonderful curb appeal, and it is a very promising enterprise. But I don't think it's appropriate to discuss that now. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. Part of what I have to say is probably more appropriate in an executive session, but I've talked to Christian about this, about the status of the lease that we had with the Belt family and what it means for those buildings. The Belt family is very much operating under the assumption that they own those buildings, that they are their property. And I did review the lease that applies to the abatements, the land for the abatements of the right-of-way. And it's pretty clear to me that it does state that unless there was some sort of termination or default or some sort of action like that, that the county does not just get to assume that they own those buildings. And certainly in terms of the general practice of doing that, I think that's a very risky thing for us to do. It could open us up to litigation. So I want to be very careful when we're talking about this issue, that we're not just making an assumption that the county just owns those buildings simply because the lease expired. I think that's problematic, but we can talk about in more detail in an executive session.
I don't think we're saying we own the buildings. I think we're saying we have a land lease. Is that correct, Christian?
I've heard two commissioners now express an interest in discussing some matters in executive session. I think we can certainly do that if the board would like to go into an executive session after this meeting is concluded, or we could schedule a separate time to do that. That may be the best way to continue this line of the discussion.
Right. We're definitely moving into this territory. So let's go ahead and maybe plan for that next week and get some more information, maybe more
Okay.
conversations with the belts and really, because we've got the leases here, we've had a chance to look at them, and I want to be able to look at some of this.
This will at least allow me to go back and renew the conversation with them. And I'll also remind them that, we do have some potential interest from third parties in this property that with the consent of the board, I'll let them know that this is something that we do need to keep moving and hopefully come to some sort of resolution on in the next 2 to 3 months, ideally, if not sooner.
I agree. Thank you, Christian. Thank you. So we'll talk.
Yeah,
we'll talk
sorry
about
to
that.
drag this on.
Thank you. Next week. All right, on to the consent agenda. If we've got it, yes, Commissioner Kula.
He's commissioner, I'm Christian. I'm totally fine with that. I am. So I do want to make sure that at some point in one of our work sessions about the trail, we also discuss the acquisition grant. And if there's, I know that there's been concern raised that this would put that, that our decisions now and ongoing put that repayment of that on the table. I know that Councillor Sadlow expressed at one of our very long meetings that that wasn't on the table. But I do know that there's precedent for that. And I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to discuss that so we're proactive.
Thank you, Commissioner.
That may be something that we get some feedback from ODOT. I'm sorry, Commissioner Burshauer, I just wanted to say real quick, that may be something we get some feedback from ODOT on next week. My thinking on the acquisition grant is more along the lines of if there are discussions that could lead to a wholesale different use of the corridor than for transportation purposes. If we start having those conversations, I think that increases the risk that we could at some point be asked to repay the acquisition grant.
Christian, I want to interrupt just briefly because I will say during the discussion yesterday, we have not received anything formal or any written formal decision from ODOT, but they do have questions about the next steps, so that if we're not proceeding under that, but I don't think they've necessarily initiated any type of formal review or given the county any type of formal notice. But it's much like along the same lines when Sonny attended the meeting back in February, and I believe he may have mentioned it at that time. They mentioned it again yesterday. So
it may be best to wait and see what we hear from them next week.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner. So if we wrap that up, we can move on to our consent agenda. Commissioner Burshauer.
Sorry, Commissioner Kula reminded me of one of my questions. Have we heard an update on CPRD? Have they approached us at all? I know that was part of the conversation last time.
My understanding is simply that they were going to have a discussion further about it, but I only knew that from what you said in the meeting. But I'm happy to follow up with them if you would like me to, or we could have staff do that if that's.
Okay, I must have misunderstood. I thought they were going to be approaching approaching Ken, but maybe not. Okay.
Well, I think that they approached the board with the initial proposal saying that they were interested in managing it in some way. And my understanding is that the majority of the board said we're not ready to have that discussion yet. But if we are ready, I'm sure that we can direct staff on that.
Okay, I think I misunderstood from last time. And then the one final quick follow-up, did we get a status on the honey pot that's out there at the bus barn that was causing issues?
I think they came and got it.
Okay.
Well, my discussions with Carrie at the bus barn, I had asked her what was going on out there, and she said she's not had any communication from Farline. She got a call on Friday to pick up the porta potty, and then they showed up. And then she had some other issues that she wanted to express, but we can hold off when we discuss the whole bus barn situation. But she did have some significant concerns.
Okay, but it sounds like that issue has been taken care of off the table.
Well,
Right.
she said Farline just showed up. I'm assuming they came and took it away with them,
Okay,
but I can't confirm that.
thanks.
Thank you. All right, so if there's nothing else on that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do we have any questions about the consent agenda? And we've already seen, according to the local contract review board, item number 1 has been discussed earlier this morning. Is there anything else on that we need to call out? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as written.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. On to old business, we have none. Other business, I1, which is the consideration of approval of the submission of a grant application for the 2021 Oregon Emergency Management State Homeland Security Program grants. You've seen those 2 grants outlined in the agenda information. Sergeant Young is standing by in case we have any particular questions, and he will be able to answer them. Do we have any questions about those grants? Any specifics about the 2 grants that we saw there? None? None?
I don't, Chair, but if Sergeant Young would like to tell us something, I'm fine with that too.
Okay. If Sergeant Young is within earshot, he used to be, but now he's moved out to the other side of the county campus.
He was in the attendees room.
There he is.
He's moving him.
There's Sergeant Young. Just when you need him, he arrives on the scene like that law enforcement never leaves. Thank you, Sergeant. Nice to have you with us, our emergency manager. Nice to see you.
Hi, thanks. I'm multitasking. I've got another meeting going on at the same time, so my apologies. So I don't have anything to add unless there's any specific questions regarding the State Homeland Security grant process. The process changed a little bit this year, so we'll be crafting a new process moving forward for the following years. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward, and I think you guys got the gist of the equipment that's being asked for this year from Yamhill Fire and the Sheriff's Office. So yeah, I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any.
One question, typically, are there more applications? Because I was kind of surprised that there were only 2, or were those 2 that rose to the top?
Yeah, there was no carving out of or disqualifying any applications this year. So yeah, we only had 2 applicants this year. I don't know if it was because of COVID and fire recovery and people getting torn in a bunch of different directions, but we did have only those 2. Yeah, so hopefully it picks up. It's kind of unclear on what the funding will look like in the future and whether we'll have that allocation, the allocation based funds versus the competitive funds, but you know, we'll work around the pitches that they throw at us and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
I was just going to entertain, or I was going to not entertain a motion. I was going to propose a motion, make a motion. So
All right, go ahead.
I need to pull it up, or can somebody tell me the item number? I think it's, is it I1?
I1.
Yes. Okay. I move that we approve item I1.
We have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Sergeant Young, as always, it's nice to see you. Thank you for all your good work. You've certainly had your hands full this year, but appreciate it, and you can get back to your other meeting, and thank you for being available today.
Thank you for allowing me to be here, and it was nice to see you all. Thank you.
All right.
Good to see you. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 8I2, which is discussion of the community project funding request to be submitted to Congresswoman Bonamici's office. Commissioner Kula.
Yes, thank you. And this was held over from last week. I wanted to update you that the Parkway Committee is supporting or is submitting for what's called the Transportation and Infrastructure Authorization. They're sending in a letter of support to ODOT to request earmarks specifically for the bypass through Congresswoman Bonamici's office. We don't have to do anything. There's no ask of the Board of Commissioners with regards to that, but I do want to note that it was a unanimous vote that the Parkway Committee and its members said that they did not, obviously because none of us have this authority outside of each of our jurisdictions, that we would plan to do, there was an expectation that we would provide some level of local match in the future. And we can discuss that in more detail, obviously, in future meetings. But that has been a requirement of ODOT when they submit requests like this. So I wanted to put that forward. So that's different than the Community Project Fund. The Community Project Fund, the Parkway Committee has submitted a letter of support for a request for funding from Congresswoman Bonamici specifically for the Newburgh-Dundee bypass trail. So going down to the river, going along the right of way from Dundee down to the river, and then on the trail that you all have seen the bridge request grant for. So the request is for a portion of the support for that. There's no ask of us this right now, but I wanted to present that to you, that the Parkway has expressed support for that project, and for Chehalis Parks and Rec submitting a request to Congresswoman Bonamici. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to take any, and I can try to answer.
Okay, so one of the questions we had when we had our last presentation from CPRD was, I had asked a little bit about where that local match was going to come from. I believe it was 1.38. I might be way off there, but we had asked where that piece was going to come from. Is that something that is going to be covered perhaps by ARPA funds?
I don't believe that Chehalis Parks and Rec has received any of the ARPA funds, but they are planning. It's $700,000 for the first phase local match, and the City of Newburgh and Chehalis Parks and Rec are putting up that matching money. But that's specifically for the ODOT Community Paths program. They have learned, so they presented it to us, the document that they had already submitted, if you recall. And they were asking for a letter of support for the future. They are now at the top of the list of 4 projects that were slated to go to the Oregon Transportation Commission for approval. So they are scored very highly. The internal ODOT decision-making process said that they really liked that project. So we expect that it will be funded as part of ODOT's overall budget. The request that goes to Congresswoman Bonamici will be for further phases of it. So that there's that still, as far as I understand, that the local match is still directly tied to phase 1. And I don't know, I haven't heard anything about a local match for I think it's called the appropriations request that they are submitting for. And it looks like Commissioner Burshauer, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you.
And then I know that Superintendent Clements had expressed that he was working with landowners to provide further documentation to you. And I'm not sure if he's sent any of that information to you.
No, that's where we left it, but thank you. No, I haven't heard anything. Thank you for that.
Okay, I know he's working on that, but Commissioner Burshauer has a question too.
Thank you. Commissioner Burshauer.
Thank you, Chair. So is the phase 1, is that technically the bridge? Is that what they're talking about when they say that with the ODOT grant?
Hess Creek.
The majority of the funding ask is for construction of that bridge over Hess Creek, but the phase 1 is from, I believe it is Fred Meyer to the mill site, or approximately to the mill site. I believe that's the total of it, but the costly infrastructure component is that footbridge over Hess Creek because it's such a long one.
Yeah, I guess my concern is it just feels an awful lot like what we've just gone through. And if you look at their audit, I went back and looked at CPRD's audit that they filed with the state, and they are budgeting that this project for this trail is going to cost upwards of $80 million, $80 million. And it just seems so exorbitant when we can't even seem to get the next phases of the bypass done. It seems like that would be the priority, to finish the bypass first and then sort of move into some of the, the other components that ultimately we'd like to see. But that's not a statement in favor or against. It's just an overarching concern that is a huge price tag for something that's 18 miles long, I think is how long it's supposed to be.
So Commissioner Burshauer, if I could add, I think you may have either the wrong document or not updated, or maybe missed a decimal point. The total project is estimated to cost 8.9 million. Phase 1 is 2.6 million. So they already know how they're going to cover the cost of phase 1. And so then the remainder would go from the river to Dundee, to in town in Dundee, along the bypass, and then it jumps over onto one of the surface streets.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to double check, because it was in multiple documents that they were citing projecting to need $80 million for these projects, and it just seemed incredibly high. So I'll have to follow up with them maybe and get some clarification.
And I can send you the documents that I have too, showing the cost projections for each of the components.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to get back to that match, I know we had a question when they were here asking where that match would come from, and there was not really a clear answer. And I'm wondering, maybe you have more information, Commissioner Kula, about where their local match was going to come from, because they were showing us the breakdown of the grants and some of their requests, and that piece was that local match, and there wasn't really an answer. Maybe you know where it would come from.
Yes, you asked that earlier, and I did say that both in our previous meetings and in person and in phone conversations, they have expressed, and on their documents, that 700,000 is coming from, I don't know the breakdown of who, how much, but from the city of Newburgh and from Chehalem Parks and Rec. Okay,
so they're going to be coming up with part of that match from their own existing budget.
I think that they're coming up with the match. They are the funder of the local match.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right.
And I don't know. Oh, sorry. I don't know. And on the bypass and local funding, we have a new board, a new composition of the Board of Commissioners. I know that Commissioner Burshauer attended Parkway and seemed to express some level of support, but I just don't know. So in any conversations I've had about the bypass, I've been very careful that, like, I don't know what the Board of Commissioners is thinking or is willing to do, their level of support for it. So I've been trying to be very careful. But I'd like to have a conversation going forward once we have a sense of how much ODOT might be asking for, and then we can start the process. But I want to make sure that we have a conversation at some point about that.
Thank you.
Specific for the bypass, not for the bypass trail.
And I think that's a discussion that's important to have in light of the fact that you see the checks that we cut to Summit for lobbying on behalf of the bypass, that the county's portion of those lobbying funds is significantly higher than any of the other jurisdictions. So if we're not all in, we better be all in, because that's a huge commitment, and it's not going to end anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think that that'll be a very important component of further conversations.
Thank you for that. Thank you. All right, so we were talking a little bit about some of these funds, and wondering if you wanted to just begin the discussion, Commissioner Kula, with what you have in mind. Oh, Christian.
All right, apologies, Chair. Todd is still on the line. He's going to stay for the land use hearing. I just want to let you know, I'm going to be dropping off. I need to join a court security meeting at noon, hoping to get some updates from the court on issues related to security and maybe some COVID updates. So I think it'd be important for me to be there. Todd's here for the balance of the meeting. If the court security meeting ends before the formal session is over, I'll rejoin. Otherwise, Todd should be here for the balance of the session. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Todd,
Thank
for
you.
joining us. So I wanted to make sure that we got Ken's input here regarding where we're at as far as knowing some direction of where we can start considering funding when we don't have a whole lot of direction and we haven't gotten a whole lot of specifics. But Ken, did you want to give us an idea of? Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Are we on a different agenda item? Or are we still on I2?
No, I think it's important for us to. We were talking about some of these community project funding, but I think that it's important for Ken to let us know before we get too far involved in these. Commissioner Kula, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to clarify. So to be as clear as I can be, this was added as an agenda item because there was some thought that a request from the Board of Commissioners might need to go to Congresswoman Bonamici's office by tomorrow about midday. The only one that I was involved in conversations about, but perhaps the two of you were involved in other ones, was whether to submit an earmark request for design and engineering of a proposed transit facility. In further conversations, and I know that Ken has been involved in some of these with Cynthia, Cynthia was not really ready to submit a request specifically for that. So I don't have a specific ask of you, but perhaps for Congresswoman Bonamici's earmark requests from the community. But if you have something, I'm happy to continue opening up the conversation. Otherwise, this wasn't for information only.
Okay, Ken.
I don't think I have anything to add on this one because just like Commissioner Kula was explaining, I think the request came to him and Commissioner Kula asked for this to be an agenda item to talk with the board. I don't, outside of the information that was provided in the packet of the request, I haven't done any type of analysis. This is not associated to the American Rescue Plan Act that's scheduled for a work session coming up, although maybe some of the discussions during that work session, could be result in, well, we think some of the ideas or proposals that we're considering might be better to contact through this route, through this type of community. I know the timelines don't mesh, but
Right.
And so I didn't have anything further to add.
Okay. All right. A little premature for us to talk about some of those funding, but tomorrow we'll get more information when we talk with NACO and AOC. So at this point, Commissioner Kula, did you have anything else? This is just informational only, and you're not asking for any specific submission from the board.
That's correct, Chair. If we had, and I kept it on as a placeholder for discussion of, submitting a request, just in case Cynthia, as she was looking through, okay, here are all the steps for the facility. I do know that Cynthia at some point would like to have a conversation with the Board of Commissioners about whether or not to acquire a property. But I think that before we have that, she needs to talk to Ken and she needs to talk to the Transit Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got to get their input. Thank you for that. Okay, great. All right, thank you. So if there's nothing else in that, we'll move on to closing this and opening the public hearing. So we'll open up the public hearing, and that is for docket PAZ 0120, consideration of approval of a comprehensive plan amendment from very low density residential, VLDR 2.5 to light industrial, LI, applicant AAA Group LLC, tax lot 4411, 1000 and 1001, 3100 Lone Oak Road, McMinnville. So, Todd.
I think Ken Friday should have to read
Oh, Ken Friday, okay, and Stephanie is joining us.
You've opened the hearing, so
Right.
you call for abstentions from members of the board.
Okay, all right, at this point, abstentions from the board? Are there any? None? Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the board to hear the matter before it? None?
And Chair, I'd like to note that Elaine Albrecht is in the audience and has her hand raised, and so is Olivier Yamin. So I just want to make sure that since that's really the time when they would raise their hand, can we pause and let them in?
Okay, Carrie?
Sorry, if you know, I'm sorry to throw us off, but really that's for them.
1 second, hold on. Okay, Stephanie, so at this point, or maybe Ken, at this point, are we dealing with objections to the jurisdiction of the board, or are there people who have testimony? Is that what we're?
We would do the raise it or waive it at this point.
Well, we're supposed to ask if there are objections to the jurisdiction of the board, ask if there are any ex parte contacts or site visits, and then the reading of the statement.
So is there anybody, I guess that's what we're asking at this point.
Yeah.
If there's objections to jurisdiction of the board. Commissioner Kula, are you seeing people who are objecting to jurisdiction of the board?
Yeah, I'd just like to note that both of the, well, I think they're coming on, but both attorneys have their hands raised. So
I doubt that they are. I doubt they are objecting to the jurisdiction of the board.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And then Councilor Albrecht, it now has dropped her hand.
Yeah, yeah, okay, thank you. So do we have any board members that need to announce or state on the record ex parte contact or site visits? Seeing none?
I do not, Chair.
Okay, so we'll probably have, so Todd, do you want to read the statements required by state law? Or do you want Ken
Sure.
Friday? Do you want to do that? Okay, go ahead.
I'd torture him if no, I'm already on. Oregon law requires that persons who attend a land use hearing be advised of certain rights and duties before the hearing begins. First, with regard to the standards of approval, state law ORS 197-763 sub 5 requires that we list the applicable substantive criteria that must be met in order for the county to approve the application. The applicable standards will be listed by the county planner in a moment as part of the staff report, I believe from Stephanie. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the standards for approval. Second, the raise it or waive it rule. Under Oregon law, any issue that might be raised in an appeal of the county's decision in this matter must be raised before the record of this hearing is closed. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board based on that issue. Third, and directed to the applicant under ORS 197-796, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval, again with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And that is the end of the reading of the statement.
Chair, I realize I didn't declare. I just wanted to know that while I'm a landowner in the county, I did not declare a potential conflict of interest because I just own EFU land.
So that would be, I think we would be on to the staff report, Madam Chair.
Chair, you're muted. There you
Yeah,
go.
yes, I asked for staff report. So who's got that? Stephanie?
I do. Good afternoon, just barely. Staff report. The subject tract is made up of 2 tax lots. Tax lot 4411-1000 is 1.9 acres, and tax lot 4411-1001 is 2.2 acres, both with access off of Northeast Lone Oak Road. The parcels currently have 2 manufactured homes, a large storage barn, and a small office. The property is located approximately a half-mile northeast of the McMinnville city limits. The tract is bordered on the south by Highway 99W and on the west by Lone Oak Road and by the railroad to the east. The parcels to the north, northwest, and south are zoned VLDR 2.5, very low density residential, and consist of rural residential lots. The property immediately to the north of the subject parcel contains a storage facility. To the southwest is zoned NC, neighborhood commercial. This area contains a furniture store and a car dealership, and further southwest is Buns Village, which is a mix of different multi-tenant commercial business uses. To the southeast is zoned LI, light industrial, and has Oregon Vineyard Supply and McMinnville Gas. Further southeast is zoned EF80, exclusive farm use, and is predominantly larger parcels in farm uses. And to the northeast is zoned AF10, agriculture forestry, and contains parcels with rural residences as well as some farm uses. Excuse me. Based on the application and the needs analysis, which tied the need for more industrial land to agriculturally supported uses, the staff report included a condition which limited the uses to farm equipment or materials manufacture, storage, sales, repair, or service. In response, the applicant provided further justification related to the need and supplemental findings related to Goal 14, the urbanization goal. With the additional findings, staff recommended approval of the application at the Planning Commission hearing with the condition proposed by the applicant, which is an application for site design review shall be submitted by the applicant and approved by the county prior to any new development or change in use of any existing structures. For any similar use listed in Yamhill County Zoning Ordinance Section 702.02, applicant shall demonstrate in the site design review how the proposed use is consistent with Goal 14. The application is subject to Sections 502, 702, and 1208.02 of the Yamhill County Zoning Ordinance. Section 904, the limited use overlay, may also be applied. Comprehensive plan policies may be applicable, and OAR 660-12-0060, the transportation planning rule. The Planning Commission recommended approval with the proposed condition at their March 4th hearing. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you, Stephanie. I have a question, Todd. We have someone who'd like to make comment, public comment on this agenda item. Is this the appropriate time for that comment?
It depends on whether it's a proponent or an opponent. The applicant's case is the next order of business in the hearing.
I understand. I'm not quite sure what the public comment is, whether it's opponent or proponent or just a comment on the agenda item specifically. So until we know that, can I just get a comment from the person who'd like to make public comment before we decide whether or not it's appropriate for testimony or?
Here, I would suggest as a course of action.
Commissioner Kula, excuse me one second. All right, well, we know we have, Stephanie, I know we have a question from Carrie. She's asking, we'll wait to see what what Stephanie says. She's asking who Eileen or Aileen is.
Eileen is the attorney for the applicant. So.
Okay, so we have nobody who wants to make public comment per se, correct?
Eileen is the next, the applicant's attorney is the next person up on the agenda.
Okay, I was just told there was someone who wanted to make public comment. So as long as we don't have anybody,
if it's her, yeah,
it's not a public comment. It's okay. So now we'll start.
Here, I would just recommend that we go with the applicant's attorney as the next.
Okay, I understand that, Commissioner. I just want to make sure that someone who wanted to make public comment got the opportunity to do so. Now that we figured that out, we can go with the applicant's case.
Oliver. Elaine, sorry, we called her Eileen.
Thanks, okay. Elaine.
We're so mean to Elaine.
All right, Elaine, we should know by now.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Elaine Albridge for the record on behalf of the applicant. I'm actually going to hand it over to my colleague, Olivier Jamon to give the applicant's presentation for the hearing. Olivier?
Hi, thanks, Elaine, and good afternoon. For the record, my name is Olivier Jamin. I'm a land use attorney at Davis Wright Tremaine, representing the applicant in this proceeding. And so also in attendance is Elaine Albridge, a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine, and the applicant, Paul Ridgway, is also listening in. First, I'd like to thank the commissioners for their time today. I know it's been a busy meeting, so I want to thank you for your time and attention. I also would like to thank the county staff for the thorough work in preparing the staff report for this application, as well as the Planning Commission for their work last month. At this time, applicant agrees with and support the Planning Commission's recommendations to approve applicant's proposal subject to the condition of approval as submitted by the applicant in their supplemental filing on February 26th. So I'll make it short and I'll pause now, and I'm available to answer any questions, but at this time we simply agree with the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Thank you so much. Do we have testimony in support of the application? Additionally? No? All right. Do we have any opposition? Any opposition? Do we have public agency reports?
Yes, we have not received any additional public agency comments other than those that were in the packet.
Okay, we don't need rebuttal by the applicant because we had no opposition testimony. So as far as the record, Todd, keeping the record open?
We would not be doing that.
Okay.
Nobody asked.
Okay, all right. Staff recommendation?
Staff recommends approval of the request based upon the findings for approval in the staff report with the modified condition recommended by the applicant.
Thank you. Todd, do we have any? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing at this point, and then we'll go ahead and deliberate and vote, and then I have a question for Todd. So at this time, we'll close the public hearing and move on to staff recommendation.
Oh, she gave it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
But still recommend approval.
All right, still recommend approval. Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So the hearing is closed and now we'll begin deliberation. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate seeing this application and all the diligence with which you presented it, both originally and to the Planning Commission, and your additional testimony. And I would, I'm not going to make a motion because I want to make sure other people have the opportunity, but I would recommend approval as well for the Board of Commissioners.
All right, well, we'll consider that a motion to approve the recommendation of the Planning Commission and staff.
Okay, it's a motion.
Further discussion?
None for me.
Hearing none, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you very much. So,
Madam Chair, we would need 2 weeks to develop written findings for approval. So April 22nd, we will have written findings, and we'll coordinate with the applicant on those.
okay, appreciate that, Todd. Well, thank you, Elaine, and thank you very much, Olivier, for joining us. Appreciate that. Todd, thank you, and we'll see findings in 2 weeks. All right, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll reopen the formal informal session at the point of announcements. Commissioners.
Thank you, Chair. Did you have a question for Todd? I thought you said you had a follow-up.
No, the follow-up was how long for findings, but he jumped the gun on that one. So he anticipated the question. Thank you.
I have one announcement. So on Tuesday night, I attended the Civil Air Patrol McMinnville Composite Squadrons award ceremony. Very cool. These folks are between the ages of 12 and around 20 or so. And I presented the Mitchell Award, which is equivalent of like an Eagle Scout Award, and then also the Earhart Awards, which are beyond that. So these kids are just fantastic. They committed to doing all of this training and preparation for these awards, even despite the pandemic. So it was just wonderful to see their very proud faces. And a lot of these kids go into the Air Force, they go into the military and some other capacity, or work for private contractors, but the focus is on aerospace, and my family is very involved with aerospace. My father was an aerospace engineer, so it was very special to see that they're engaging in this wonderful career path. So we're very proud of them.
Thank you for that. I don't even think many people are aware of this in our county, and they are very impressive kids. It's an impressive program. Thank you for that. Commissioner Kula, announcements?
I really got mine on item I too, as it were. But I did want to put out a real big thank you to public health staff and to McKaylee for sending out to everybody in county staff the invite and the information for the vaccine clinic. And I know that it's been a headache at times to coordinate everybody. So I just wanted to put out a big thank you to public health and to McKaylee for that work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I echo that as well. And I want to thank Lindsay Manfred and her staff. They have been working just tirelessly throughout this whole long year and a half. We did have a phone call with Leah Horner at the governor's office yesterday, the District 6 chairs with Commissioner Cameron and Commissioner Pope, and we talked about our concerns about the restaurant industry. Having heard a presentation this week from Jason Brand from the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, that our restaurants really are struggling with these limited capacity. And so they're really trying to figure out what they can do. So we, in discussions with Leah, had asked again about this back and forth, these openings and closings. It really does put a strain on them. They're having a hard time getting staff because with some of the unemployment payments, it's just not really in their best interest to go back to work. So we talked about that. We talked about cleaning up the that whole unemployment system, which, as we know, is a concern. Craig Pope brought up that nothing in the governor's 10-point plan was about backfilling that unemployment pool first, that has kept people eating throughout this whole process. So we talked about that, and we talked about some of the concerns. One of the things that I brought up, and I'm hoping that the Oregon Health Department starts to at least collect some data about some of the adverse reactions that are being submitted to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is run by the CDC, and that we have some notation and some data about adverse reactions to the vaccines that will at least be categorized by county. And again, just really looking at getting data on hospital capacity, because as we move back and forth into these more restrictive risk levels, I think it should be predicated on hospital capacity and not necessarily on number of case positivities. I did ask that Leah encourage the Oregon Health, the OHA, to make note of our concerns about the misinformation about categorizing this as FDA approved or having completed phase 3 clinical trials, which these vaccines have not. So I just want to make sure that in the interest of being transparent and informed consent, that everybody knows what's going on with vaccines. So we had a really good discussion. And other than that, we've all received the email from somebody who's concerned about dumping problems at Meadow Lake Road. And fortunately, our Public Works Department is usually quick to respond to these things, but it's really a shame that they have to be doing this. One of the things that I proposed a number of years ago was that we have some kind of a Crime Stoppers program where we will offer reward for people who are found to do illegal dumping. It seems to be on the rise in rural areas. And we were talking about this, and I don't know, maybe Commissioner Kula, this is something to discuss with RIAC, putting a sign up, because we put cameras up and they stole the cameras. They stole 2 cameras that were put up at one of the particular dump sites, which was really becoming problematic. And they were dumping furniture and stolen mailboxes and computers and tires. So if we had a sign that said, hey, if you are caught, if you are caught and prosecuted and convicted of illegal dumping, that there's a reward for somebody who gets a license plate. We might be able to at least mitigate some of this. So I don't know if it's something you want to talk about, but I hate to see our public works crew have to go out and pull some really disgusting things off the roads. So anyhow.
And I will communicate. We have a RIAC tonight, so I will communicate that to them.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing what they think. It's just our staff has way more important things to do, and this is becoming kind of a blight.
Right, and I think that the landowners in the area who reached out to me, and I think I'm pretty sure that you were CC'd on these emails. They've asked about the possibilities of really architectural changes, how to change the route so that it's not a place where people can easily stop and drop. And so I think that's a good starting place for this particular location. But it's worth asking RIAC if they would support something like this. I know that they're very supportive of people going out and picking up garbage, but this is the opposite. So I will convey that to them tonight.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Any further announcements, Ken, Todd? If there's none, we'll go ahead and adjourn. I want to thank Carrie and Carolina for keeping us going throughout these meetings. Appreciate it.